Hi folks, I've been putting off doing this video because I knew it was going to be one of the most complex and pain in the ass ones to do, so I'm saving the crappiest one for last. Okay, so this one, we're going to look at how to do mode states. Now, the VPC software, the way it default handles mode states is certainly not the way I would do it, so I'll just bring up the software and I'll give you an overview of what they do. Okay, here we are. So I've selected our throttle. And we're in the button tab because that's what we're interested in. So here we have Yield Trusty Mode Selector. So it has 5 positions. Currently it's in position 1. So button 55, which corresponds to this, is currently active. If I were to turn the knob, it'll obviously go to the different ones. And the color on the joystick changes as well to match this set configuration here. So how does this work? Right. Well, all the smarts is pretty much inside the firmware that runs in the microprocessor that's inside the stick. No, throttle, should I say. So right now, we have button 40, which corresponds to B1. That is the 8 square buttons that sit directly behind the throttle. They are configured against mode number 1. So if I'm in mode number 1 like I am now, and I press B1, which is physical button 40, it's going to send logical button 22 to Windows. And if I scroll down, if we're in mode 2, the same button, physical button 40, labeled B1 on the stick, if that then is pressed in mode 2, it will send button 50, and there's a whole bunch of these configurations all the way up to mode 5. Now basically what this means is that in the different modes, a same physical button will fire a different logical button to Windows. Now you can see here, we top out it in 96. So if I wanted to add and bind more buttons, I'm going to run out kind of quickly. Now the SciTech software, how they handle it, because that's obviously what I've used in the past, they do things differently. In the SciTech software, there is a little piece of profiling software that runs in Windows. And then the joystick axes, buttons, and all that other stuff gets sent up from the joystick, and then the profiling software intercepts that, and then your profile can change things on the fly, so to speak. So you can load profiles and just quickly change about and completely change your button sets, but it's all handled in this abstraction layer that sits between the joystick and Windows. So, for example, in SciTech, I would maybe bind one of these button presses, just, I don't know, button 10, for example, or sorry, button 8 logically is Windows. I could maybe have that doing just button 8, so whenever that button is pressed, button 8 supported to Windows, or I could redirect it and have a key press, for example, F or something, would be sent instead, and that would be handled in this layer here, in this profiling software. So that's kind of the difference. Now the SciTech stuff is pretty damn good in the fact that each mode, and you have 3 modes, you can have every single button on the joystick bound to a function in mode 1, and then in mode 2, for example, you have a completely different set of bindings. So it is very, very powerful, and it's very easy to use. You can watch my other video where I compare how SciTech do it and how Virpil do it to see the differences. So what do we do then? Well, what we're going to do in a minute is I'm going to show you how to do the same sort of thing using an external piece of software. So just close this down and restart it up, and we'll go through the procedure from scratch. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to change the configuration of the throttle. Now we're going to use the VPC software for that, so we'll just bring it up. We'll select our throttle, go to button. Right, first up, this section here that I'm highlighting, this is the configuration for the mode selector rotary on the right hand side of the stick. So right now, this column here is an indicator, and what it's basically saying is that the position is at position 1, and you can see here button 55 is active. So if I were to start turning the knob all the way to the right, it switches between the different modes and these different buttons go active. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically clear this, and I'll do that by going to this column here and setting all of these values to 0. The next column, I'm just going to set these to off. And in this column, I'll set this to this dash null value, I think, from what I think it is. This column here deals with colors, so I'm just going to set them all to black. It's just not going to work the same way when we finish with this. And this column here is the intensity. Set them to 0. Okay, that's the very first step done. So what I will do is I will save that back to the device. I'm doing this just in case I cock something up, because if I make a mistake in the software, then what I can do is load the device profile from the stick back into the software and then undo whatever I've cocked up. Okay, so as I've pointed out in the other videos, the way that this normally works is a little bit odd. So physical button 40, which is the B1 button, so basically this section here, these physical IDs, correspond to the B1 to B8 buttons. So in mode selector switch 1, this is called shift in this column by the way, but shift and mode are the same thing. When this button B1, as in physical button 40, is pressed, we're in mode 1, then send logical button 22 to Windows. So that's how basically that works for that mode 1. And then here, the same button being pressed in mode 2 will send logical button 50 to Windows. And you can see it goes all the way down to mode 5. So we're going to need to get rid of those. And I'll just quickly go through how to do that. We'll just double click on the top one. And then make sure this is unticked, because if this is ticked, then it will interpret whatever button's currently pressed, which actively now is 55. So if I press that, it'll stick 55 in there. Not interested in that. Untick it. Just make sure it's unticked, and then hit this clear button here. It'll set the physical button to 0 and set the mode to nil, and the shift and other stuff as well. So just save and next. And we just do this a lot of times. As we go through them, you'll see that the shift state or mode is incrementing as we go through each block of 8 buttons. Okay, so there we go. We just basically hammered through all those configs and set them all to 0. Now you can see we have a bit more wiggle room here. There's a lot more free buttons. It doesn't really matter because we're not going to use them in the same manner as before. So next, we have to go and play with the default mode 1 selections of 4 buttons, B1 to B8, which corresponds to this block. We'll click on the first one. The shift or mode we will set to 0. Go save and next. Save and next. And there we go. We've cleared that block out now. So that basically has set those buttons to just operate normally the way the rest of the buttons currently do. So that's the sort of second part of this little bit done. The last part we need to do now is we need to set buttons against our rotary positions. So that's rotary positions 1 is equal to 55 and so forth until you get to position 5, which is 59. So here, so we've got these unbound to things. We just double click on this one. And I go 55. Mode is normal by default. Save and next. 56. 57. 58. 9. Oops. 9. Duh. Cancel. So there we go. there is our rotary mode selector, now configured to fire off button 50, 51, 52, 53 and 54, the windows depending on the mode it's currently set in. So that's the physical button, and this is the logical button that Windows receives. So that's basically this part done. What we're going to do now is we're going to save this profile back to the device. Okay, and one other thing we could do while we're in here and playing around with this is the LED configuration. Now before, the LEDs, the colors were controlled by this, and what happens is when you switch this off, it'll go to the default value. So right now my joystick is lit up with this sort of turquoisey color, so I don't really like that color. I'm going to change it to the nice blue, so just select blue. So this here is what I want it to be. This is the intensity I want it to be, and this column here is read back from what it's actually currently doing. I'll just save that back to the device. And if I look at my stick, it's got a nice blue color now. Only other thing I'd consider doing now is to basically export the profile to file. And the reason why I'm going to say to do that is because if I want to switch quickly back to the original mode or switch between these, I can do it very easily just by loading the profile and then, importing the profile and then saving it back to the device. And that way there I can quickly change between the two. So let's not waste the work we've done. Okay, there we go. Calibrated, it's a throttle, and it's no mode because we're not using the mode on it. Let's save. So there we go. We've exported the file, and we now have a backup. We have the original backup we have. So if I want to flick between the two of these, it's very, very simple. I just go import from file, go to the other one, the device profile. And it's back to the way we started before I started fiddling around. So you can see these buttons are bound to the different modes that they were by default. I'll just import from file and switch it back to the way we need it because this is what we're doing today. Save device profile. And there we go. That's the first bit done. That basically allows us to use the Joystick Gremlin software to handle the mode selection from now on. Okay, so first step's been done. I've sorted out a configuration profile on the VPC throttle and saved it back to the throttle. Now begins the work. First off, we're going to load up Joystick Gremlin and we're going to add some modes. So let's bring up Joystick Gremlin. Here she is here. Here's our main interface. We have our devices that are currently plugged into my computer across the top here. We're interested in the VPC throttle because that's going to be where we're going to play around with the mode selection. So let's start and create some modes. So go to Tools, Manage Modes. Just bring this over. Here we go. By default, it's got one called Default. How ironic. And we'll just rename that and call it Mode 1. So we have five position mode selector on this thing. So there we go. There's our first one. Add mode. Mode 2. Mode 5. Right, so we've set up our modes now. And you can see them listed here in the interface. Okay, so let's do something very basic. What I'm going to do is I'm going to press a button on my joystick. Okay, so buttons 2 and 3. These are the ones that I'm going to set up for using my track IR because I use my track IR when I'm flying. So button 3, I'm going to create a new action for it. So the action type, because This is the mode we're in. This is the button we're interested in, and this is what we're going to do with it. So, type of command is just simple map to keyboard. So this has multiple different options in here for different funky stuff. We'll go through some of them later. And we will just add map to keyboard. Okay, so this gives us our basic command type, which is a keyboard mapping. And if we click in this button here, we can then fire in a key combination. So my key combination for my track IR reset is right control and home. So there we go, I'll press right control and home and it set that command up. Now we can give it a description up here. So that one's called track IR reset. And what that'll do is whenever I press right control and home, which is bound to my track IR software, it'll basically reset the view. So, you know, I don't know if you use track IR now, but every so often you might have to reset the view. So you look at the center of the screen, you hit the button or combination of buttons, it does that, and it recenters the head in the game directly to where you're looking right now. Okay, so the other button I'm going to press. So what you basically do is you press a button on the joystick and it'll take you to where that button is listed. And if you press a button and you go, oh, I can't see it, it might be down here because there's quite a lot of buttons. So button 2, I'm going to add map to keyboard. And this time it's right control on insert. So I'll just click record keys. And there we go, right control and insert. And I'll give it a name. So this one is going to pause my track IR. So you can see yourself, it populates the name in here. And this little symbol is for it's bound to something. These other ones are unbound as at the moment. Okay, so whoop-de-doo, we've actually bound a couple of keys. The next thing I would suggest we do, because track IR is, for me, track IR, pause and reset are two commands I use a lot. Instead of having to bind them, if I click on mode 2, see the way it's blank? So this is a completely different set of bindings for all of the devices. Obviously I haven't programmed anything into the actual main stick yet, but you consider that the modes operate across all your devices. But right now I'm just concerned with the throttle. So because these two keys are common, I would use them a lot in nearly every aircraft. Even if I change mode, it would be a pain in the balls to have to go and rebind them on this mode, mode 3, mode 4, mode 5. So there's the guy who wrote Joystick Gremlin, the clever fellow he is, put in some functionality to actually handle that. So if I go to Tools, Manage Modes, there is a column here called Parent. Now what this basically means is that I leave mode 1 alone because it doesn't have a parent mode. But if I go to mode 2 and give it parent mode is mode 1, and the same with the other ones here. Okay, so that's set up. Now what this basically means is that I do not have to go and bind these to buttons 2 and 3 on all these different modes. What it basically means is that as long as I don't fiddle with button 2 and 3 in the other modes, then what will happen is these two buttons will follow through all the other modes regardless. So if there's a lot of common commands you might use across different modes, then I would suggest you bind them into a mode and then make the other modes parent. You'll notice that the list here is shifted over to the right. That's to sort of denote that these other modes are a parent of mode 1. So that's something that's very, very handy and will save a lot of time. Now, in my comparison video that I did before, where I was showing the Cytec software versus the Virpil software, you'll note that it had a little drop down in the Cytec software for each of the buttons, which meant that if you ever bound a button in that profile, it would be very easy to swap it or move it around. Now, unfortunately, Joystick Gremlin does not yet have this functionality, but the good fellow who wrote it is looking into possibly putting it in. So that's their first step for getting your profile up and running, and to show you the basics of how to set up your modes in such a way that it will be efficient. So far we've managed to configure our modes in the Joystick Gremlin software. Now we just have to sort out the ability to change between the modes. So select mode 1 here. So okay, here we go. When we're in position 1, which is mode 1, and we change the rotary round to 51, which is the mode 2 selector, and we click here, switch mode, add mode 2. And what that will mean is when we switch this button between 1 and 2 in mode 1, it'll basically switch us to mode 2. We'll go to mode 2. And in mode 2, if we go back to mode 1, which is this button, then we go switch mode, add mode 1. And this is obviously a position for 2. So in mode 2, if we go round to 3, and we go to mode 3, and in position 3, if we go down, that'll be this one, that'll be mode 2, and if we go up, that'll be go to mode 4, then we go to mode 4 here. So in mode 4, if we go back, that'll be to 3. And if we go up, it'll be to mode 5, which is that one. Oops, wrong button. Escape. Mode 5. And then we go to mode 5. And from mode 5, we can only go back to mode 4, which is that position. And mode 4. And there we go. That sets up the rotary to now flick between the different modes. And if you want, you can, let's see, where is it? Options. Show message when changing mode. Okay, that's good. Now if I just click the button here, this will activate the current profile. And if you look at your computer, you'll not see it on mine, unfortunately, because I can't capture that lower corner. So we're in mode 1 right now. If we flick the knob around, goes mode 2, mode 3, mode 4, mode 5, and then back down again. And that's it. That's basically how to set up modes within Joystick Gremlin using a rotary switcher in the Joystick Gremlin software. So now that's the basic setup. You now have the ability to switch between the different modes, and you also have the ability to have commands because of the parent function here, the way this is set up with the parent function, that will go across all the modes unless you like to, unless you want to redefine them within a sub mode. So if I want to select another mode like mode 2, I can maybe change those buttons to whatever else I want. And that's it. That's the basics of how you set up your Joystick Gremlin to do the switching between modes that the software for Virpil can't actually do. And now you can create whatever bindings you want against these buttons. Now, as before, as I showed in my other video about the SciTech software, if you want to redefine something, as in make it do something different, you can redefine it as for example, a keybind here or whatever else you want. And if you want to leave it unmolested, you just leave it as is, and the software will just fire that button command up the windows. So Joystick Gremlin basically sits between the joystick and Windows and allows you to fiddle with stuff in between. Now that's the very basics of how you get this mode switching done. And now that this basic template is done, I'll just save it off. Call it mode. I'll just overwrite that. Now that I've got that sorted out, it's very, very easy to add more and more commands to it to build up a nice profile. Like I say, this button here, that's your basic activate the profile, which basically switches it live. So once I click on that, that goes green. And because I've got that little tick box in the settings set, a little pop-up appears down in the lower right hand corner showing that I'm in mode 1 right now. And that's it. That's how you use the Joystick Gremlin software to handle modes for you. Hope this helps. Right, okay. We have a very basic profile set up in Joystick Gremlin. It gives us the capability of having 5 different modes, and those modes will be controlled by the rotary knob on the Virpil throttle. So we want to maybe add some more keys in here, and I'm just going to go through and show you how to do that. So here's our little profile. It's called mode. It's got our different modes that we're actually going to be programming in, so we'll just keep her in mode 1 right now. And we've only bound a couple of buttons so far on the throttle, so let's bind a couple on the joystick. So let's bind the stage 1 and stage 2 trigger. That's basically using the A10, so let's go and find out what those bindings are. So load up DCS. DCS is loading. Okay, there we go. Oh, Christian Eagle's coming out soon. I'll not be buying that. So let's go to options. Let's bring her over. We're in A10 game mode. We're in category all, so show me everything. Yeah, see, there's a whole bunch of buttons that are bound here, and I don't really want them bound, so I'm going to clear these while I'm here. So click into category, and then this clear category will flush this entire column. So that's for the throttle. See, it flushed them all. And the Warbird, it's the other one I'm interested in. I'm going to click in there and clear category and flush them. Unfortunately, out of the gate, DCS will try and put a whole pile of bindings in there, and God bless its little heart for trying, but no thank you. So let's go find what we're looking for. Go to hotas. Right, so trigger, gun 1 and 2. It's P and space. Okay, so that's what we're looking to do, P and space. So stage 1 is this one. So we go map keyboard, add. Chord key, that's P. Call that just, I don't know, gun 1. And over here, add space, and call this gun 2. Okay, so we've just created those 2 bindings for those 2 individual buttons. Now if we activate the profile, bring this back over, and then press the first stage trigger, takes you there. Press and hold, and then press forward more, and there she goes to space. So we've just bound the 2-stage trigger there on our VPC grip. Right, a brief explanation of why I choose to do it this way. There are a lot of keys that are common across aircraft. For example, one of the main ones I could think of would be targeting. Targeting seems to be quite common across all aircraft, so I'm going to go set that up and I'll show you why I'm doing this. Okay, so I'm going to pick something on my throttle and I'm going to use the pyramid hat switch, which are these buttons here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bind them to the targeting. Now, a lot of the aircraft, for example, the KA-50 has a little camera system and it has the ability to move the camera around. So it has an up, down, left and right configuration for that. But also a lot of aircraft share exactly identical keys. So it would be really nice if no matter which aircraft I was flying, exactly the same physical button on my joystick did the same function. And that's why I would choose to do it in this software, because the profiles that ED create and come out with might not always match the same. So if you're flying one aircraft, you could be pressing button X and it does one thing. You're flying a different aircraft, you press button X and it does something totally weird and different. It'd be really nice to keep the buttons across the aircraft doing the same things, especially since the key bindings are the same. So let's go and let's play around with the configuration here for this one. So 9, that's the up. So I'm going to add the keyboard. I'll call it target up. Okay, record key, and that's going to be the semicolon. I'll go down, which is 10. RGT down. Add. Down is going to be dot. Oops. It's going to be dot. Okay. I'm going to go left, button 11. RGT left. Add map to keyboard. Dot. Sorry, comma even. And let's do right. And that's the slash. So there we go. We've just bound four of those keys. Now, what it basically means is I can use those same buttons across all aircraft now that have this capability, and I know that this will be common amongst them. So I'll just show you that quickly now. Just drag this sucker over. And there it is. Left, right, up, down. Now if I were to go and pick another aircraft. Where do I want to go? Let's see. What am I looking for? There's K57. And lo and behold, it's exactly the same buttons. So this means that I don't need to try and remember different mappings for different bloody aircraft. I have a button which uses a keyboard command. Let's go to SU-27. Same buttons. Do you see where I'm going with this now? The fact is that I can now have this common profile and exactly the same physical buttons on my joystick, no matter which area. There might be about 7 or 8 aircraft use that exact same configuration. Obviously, there's some that don't, but you can pretty much guarantee that this makes things a whole lot easier to learn how to fly. If you don't have to keep learning which buttons are doing different functions, if a button like that pyramid hat switch up always is camera or targeting whatever up, that means it's a whole lot less of a bollock to actually learn how to fly something. But if you're using the same bindings across a whole bunch of different aircraft. So that is the main reason why I do my bindings outside of DCS. The other reason, which became quite apparent in the last few months, was every so often DCS cock these up. They maybe release a bad patch that bollocks up your entire profile. And I had a lot of my friends freaking out when the F-18 broke basically about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Their key bindings were all sorts of fucked up. And I'm like, oh, that really sucks, but it doesn't matter to me because my bindings are done in an external piece of software. I am binding the functions against the keys. So I'm binding against the keyboard setup here, and that pretty much doesn't change. I mean, obviously, certain ones are added and very occasionally swapped around, but most of the main ones are common. And a lot of the aircraft, for example, in this targeting one example I've just given you, use the same keys. Another classic example would be flaps toggle. Flaps toggle across a ton of aircraft is F. But if you were using the profiles from DCS, the ones that they create for your joystick, you can't be guaranteed that that particular joystick button that they assign F in one aircraft is going to be the same for another. So that is one of the reasons why I use this software. I don't need to remember like whole different sets of configurations. I just need to remember what my main set is, and I'm good to go. So I'm hoping this tutorial helps you guys out and explains why it can be beneficial to use an external piece of software. Yes, it will be a bollock to set this up, and it will take you time. There's no denying it. The SciTech profiles I had evolved over several years, and if you see the other video I did, the SciTech software has an awesome, awesome feature built into it. They approach the situation very similarly to this, but what they have is all the bindings for that profile. And when I say a binding is a name of something and then the key combination or whatever function goes with it are stored at the bottom of the file. And then at the top part of the file, there's a definition that says, I don't know, like for example, button 2 use this ID, and there's an ID against this function that's listed at the bottom of the file. So it just basically marries the two together, which means in the SciTech software, I can right click on one of these. And if I've bound like 50 keys that'll appear in a big list, I can just right click, pick one of them, click OK, and Bob's your uncle. It'll appear against this particular button. Now I've requested the joystick, I've put a feature request in for Joystick Gremlin to have this functionality, and I hope in the near future the good fellow that wrote Joystick Gremlin, because this is a very useful piece of software, will indeed do something similar. Apparently Virpil are working on their own solution, and I hope they come out with something similar to the SciTech solution, which I did sort of compared in my other video, because the SciTech hardware, it was okay, it wasn't like rock solid or amazing, but the software and how they designed the software was a work of art. It is a thing of beauty how they designed it to be so flexible. I mean, on the other sticks like the X52, there was a button assigned actually for loading profiles. So if you held the button down and looked at your wee screen, you could scroll up and down and pick whichever profile without having to alt tab and maybe right click on something to actually change profile. So that was a really neat feature. So anyway, I hope this helps you guys out if you want to do some if you want to use your Virpil joystick and use the mode selector in a logical and fully featured way, because you'll have to use this external piece of software along with it to make it do all the cool stuff you may or may not want to do.